Hello, welcome to English for Everyone, where we practice real-life American English. Today we're going to learn some very special words with different pronunciation. So let's get started. Today we're looking at the pronunciation of AU. When you see AU together, it makes the sound aw, like the sound in on, off, call and ball. The sound is aw. Make the sound back here, aw, aw. We see words like audio, audience, daughter. All these words have AU, and the AU is pronounced aw. Let's practice the pronunciation. Audio, audio. Audience, audience. Daughter, daughter. Very good. But is AU always pronounced this way? Well, almost always. I know only 3 words with AU that have different pronunciations. Let's look at these special words. The first word is this word. It's pronounced gauge. That's right, the AU makes a long A sound. Gauge. The long A, like in day, and say and pay. Gauge. The first G is a hard G sound, followed by the long A, gay. And the second G is the J sound, like in juice and jump. Together, gauge. You have one gauge and many gauges. These are gauges. You have gauges on your car, and you need to check your gauges while you're driving. It's important to check the gauges. And what's the most important gauge? Well, I think the most important gauge is the speedometer. Pronunciation, speedometer. The most important gauge, for me, is the speedometer because you're always checking the speedometer. You're always checking to see how fast you're going. You check the speedometer to see how fast you're going. That's the most important gauge. Let's practice. Do you need to check the gauges while you're driving? That's right, you need to check the gauges while you're driving. And what's the most important gauge? That's right, the speedometer is the most important gauge. Let's talk about different gauges. You also have this gauge. This is the temperature gauge. Pronunciation, tempera. Not temperature, but temperature. The TU makes a ch sound like chicken. Temperature. Remember, it's 3 syllables. Temperature. Not temperature, not 4 syllables, but 3. Temperature. This is the temperature gauge. This is the temperature gauge, and it's very important. It lets you know the temperature of your engine. It lets you know if your engine gets too hot, because if it gets too hot, you can damage your engine. So the temperature gauge is very important. So you need to check the temperature gauge to make sure your engine doesn't get too hot. Let's practice. Why do you need to check the temperature gauge? That's right, you need to check the temperature gauge to make sure your engine doesn't get too hot. And this is called your fuel gauge. The fuel gauge lets you know how much gas you have, or how much diesel fuel you have, depending on your engine. I don't have a diesel, so I check the fuel gauge to see how much gas I have. You can also call it a gas gauge. So you check your fuel gauge to see how much gas you have. Let's practice. Why do you check your fuel gauge? That's right, you check your fuel gauge to see how much gas you have. And this gauge has 2 names. You can call it a tachometer, or you can call it the RPM gauge. Let's call it a tachometer. With the word tachometer, the CH makes a K sound. K, K, tach, tachometer. You check the tachometer to check your RPM. RPM stands for revolutions per minute. It's how fast your engine is turning. When you push the gas, the tachometer goes up. That's how fast your engine is turning. Again, RPM, revolutions per minute. The tachometer is important if you drive a standard. You need to check the tachometer if you're driving a standard. It's very important. Let's practice. Do you need to check the tachometer if you're driving a standard? That's right, you need to check the tachometer if you're driving a standard. It's very important. because you need to know when to change gears. So remember the 4 important gauges in your car. You have the speedometer, that's the most important gauge. You have the temperature gauge, that lets you know the temperature of your engine. You also have the fuel gauge, that lets you know how much gas you have, or diesel fuel, depending on your car. And don't forget the tachometer, or the RPM gauge. That lets you know how fast the engine is turning. And remember the pronunciation, gauge. Use the long A sound. 1 gauge and 2 gauges. Make sure you check your gauges.
So I gripped the wheel tighter, checked my gauges, and made my move.
Every single gauge is broken.
The gauge is starting to move. Look, Kate!
I don't know. The auxiliary power's out, so the gauges don't work.
And keep an eye on that number 3 engine gauge over there.
You watch these gauges?
Well, my gauges must be wrong.
Now let's look at this word. This is not an English word, so we pronounce it differently. We pronounce the AU like ow, like in words out, now, and how. Again, the sound is ow, so this word is pronounced Audi. It's the name of a car. This is an Audi. We use the article N. This is an Audi. An Audi is a luxury car. I think it's made in Germany. Let's practice. Is an Audi a luxury car? That's right, an Audi is a luxury car. And we have this word, because. The AU is not pronounced aw, like in the word cause. If I have the word cause, I follow the rule and AU has the sound aw, cause. Don't cause any problems. But the word because is different. The AU is pronounced with a short sound, like cup, cut, and up. Because. Now, you might hear an American say because if they're from New York. If you speak with a heavy New York accent, you might hear Americans say because. But that's only New York. The rest of America says because. This is the normal pronunciation of the word. Because. Make the relaxed close sound. Because. So these are the only 3 words I know that don't follow the rule. The rule is AU makes a sound aw. Always? Well, almost always, because we have these 3 words. Gauge, Audi, and because. With these 3 words, the AU does not make the aw sound. It makes 3 different sounds. In gauge, it makes a long A. In Audi, it makes a sound ow. And in because, it makes a sound because. And if you know any other words that have AU together and have a different pronunciation, let me know. Put it in the comments. Thank you for watching, and if you liked this video, subscribe to our channel. And if you want to become a member, click the join button. And we'll see you next time.